A child vanished from an impossible locked room. Her parents spent 15 years chasing whispers in the dark, until a hidden blueprint screamed the terrifying truth. Subscribe for mysteries that crawl under your skin. October 3rd, 1998, 2:17 p.m. First National Trust, downtown Hartford. The air inside the bank vault corridor tasted metallic, cold, smelling faintly of old paper money and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh, unforgiving shadows on the thick steel door of Vault B. Eleanor Vance, 8 years old, with eyes the color of storm clouds and hair like spun wheat, stood just inside that door. Her mother, Sarah Vance, watched her daughter fidget, clutching the small velvet pouch containing her grandmother's pearl necklace they'd just placed in their safety deposit box, Box 724. Eleanor hated the vault's chill, the tomb-like silence broken only by the distant, muffled sounds of the bank lobby. Sarah remembered the exact shade of Eleanor's blue coat, the scuff on her left Mary Jane shoe. "Ready to go, sweet pea?" Sarah called softly, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. She was already stepping back into the narrow access corridor, giving the vault manager, Mr. Henderson, room to swing the massive door shut. Henderson, a man whose face seemed permanently set in lines of bland efficiency, offered Eleanor a tight, practiced smile. Eleanor hesitated, looking back at her mother, a flicker of unease crossing her small face. Then, she took a tiny step towards the corridor. Mr. Henderson began pulling the vault door closed. It moved silently on well-oiled hinges, a thick slab of steel designed to withstand catastrophe. Sarah watched the gap narrow. She saw Eleanor turn fully towards her, one small hand reaching out. The heavy door met its frame with a soft, definitive thunk. The locking mechanism engaged automatically, a series of heavy, mechanical clicks and clunks resonating through the floor. The sound of security. The sound of finality. Sarah waited. The corridor felt suddenly colder. She expected the smaller, secondary access door set within the vault door, the day gate, to open immediately. It was protocol. The vault manager always exited with the client after sealing the main door. 10 seconds passed. Silence. Sarah frowned, leaning closer to the cold metal. "Eleanor?" "Mr. Henderson." Her voice sounded thin, swallowed by the concrete and steel. Nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at her skin. "Eleanor." She knocked sharply on the vault door. "Mr. Henderson." "Open the door." Her knocking turned to pounding, the sound echoing uselessly. She spun, frantically scanning the empty corridor, then dashed back towards the lobby entrance, yelling for help. "My daughter. She's still in there. Open the vault." Bank staff converged, confusion turning to alarm. The manager on duty, Ms. Gallagher, pale-faced, hurried to the vault control panel. Security protocols were invoked. Override codes were entered. The heavy locking bolts retracted with agonizing slowness. The moment the seal broke, Sarah shoved past Ms. Gallagher and Mr. Henderson, who stood frozen just inside the lobby entrance, his face ashen. The vault was empty. Utterly, chillingly empty. Boxes lined the walls, identical, impersonal. The steel floor gleamed under the relentless fluorescent light. No Eleanor. No sign of struggle. No hidden corners. Just cold, sterile space and a lingering scent of disinfectant. Sarah's scream shattered the silence, a raw sound of pure terror that echoed off the walls and seemed to hang in the air long after her voice gave out. Detective Roy Miller arrived within 15 minutes, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He interviewed the stunned bank staff, reviewed security tapes that showed nothing unusual beyond Eleanor and Sarah entering the vault corridor with Henderson, and then Sarah exiting alone moments later, distraught. The cameras covered the corridor entrance, the lobby, every external door. No Eleanor emerged. The vault itself had no internal cameras, a standard practice for privacy. Henderson swore he stepped out with Eleanor. He recalled the brush of her coat sleeve as he ushered her through the closing gap. The tapes showed him exiting just after the main door shut, looking back once, seemingly at nothing. Sarah's testimony was frantic, fragmented. Eleanor was right there. She turned, she reached, then the door closed. Miller ordered the vault sealed again. Forensics crawled over every inch, dusting for prints that yielded nothing but bank staff and the Vance, scanning for trace evidence that vanished into the sterile environment, searching for hidden panels or ventilation shafts wide enough for a child. Nothing. It was a sealed box. Eleanor Vance had ceased to exist within its walls. The official report would later call it a disappearance under circumstances defying logical explanation. For Sarah and her husband, David, it was the day the world ended. David Vance, a structural engineer known for his calm pragmatism, arrived at the bank to find his wife crumpled on a stiff plastic chair in a back office, wrapped in a coarse bank blanket, shaking uncontrollably. The news hit him like a physical blow. He gripped the doorframe, his knuckles white, the color draining from his face. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice choked. The detective's grim expression told him everything words couldn't. The following days were a blur of agonizing limbo. Police searches expanded block by block, then mile by mile. Flyers with Eleanor's smiling school picture plastered every lamppost, store window, and community bulletin board. Her face stared from the evening news, the local paper's front page. Sarah and David gave tearful pleas on camera, their voices breaking, begging for anyone who knew anything to come forward. Sarah replayed the moments before the vault door closed 1,000 times, each memory a fresh stab. Had Eleanor looked scared? Was there something, anything, she'd missed? David focused on the mechanics, the impossibility. He pored over blueprints of the bank building obtained through a contact, studying the vault's construction, the ventilation systems, the sewer lines nearby. Nothing offered a plausible exit. Hope, a fragile, desperate thing, flickered with every phone call. A possible sighting at a bus station. A child matching her description scene near the river. David and Sarah raced to each location, hearts pounding, only to face crushing disappointment. A different child, a case of mistaken identity, a dead end. The police, initially intense, began to subtly shift. Resources were pulled for active cases. The questions, once focused on finding Eleanor, started probing the Vance's lives, their marriage, their finances. The unspoken implication hung heavy. Had they done something? The media, initially sympathetic, began to hint at the mystery, the locked room. Whispers started. The strain was corrosive. Sarah stopped sleeping, jumping at every creak in their suddenly cavernous house. Eleanor's room remained untouched, a shrine of unbearable pain. She stopped going to her job at the library, unable to function. David buried himself in work, then in the investigation, then in furious, futile activity, organizing search parties long after the police had scaled back, badgering detectives with new theories, spending hours online in nascent missing persons forums. Arguments erupted from sheer exhaustion and grief. Sarah blamed herself for taking her eyes off Eleanor for that split second. David raged against the incompetence of the bank, the police, the universe. Their shared agony became a wall between them. Intimacy died. Conversation revolved only around Eleanor, the case the gnawing void. Months bled into a year. The vigils grew smaller. The news stories became infrequent updates, then vanished altogether. The flyers faded, were torn down by weather or replaced by new advertisements. The case grew cold, a dusty file in Detective Miller's cabinet, though he never forgot the haunted look in Sarah Vance's eyes. The Vances became ghosts in their own community, marked by tragedy. David stopped bringing Eleanor's name up at the dinner table. Sarah stopped crying openly, but the tears were always there, just beneath the surface. They existed in a state of suspended animation, haunted by the echoing thunk of a vault door closing. The mystery of the locked room became their life sentence, a puzzle with no solution, a wound that refused to heal. The vibrant little girl who loved Chopin and climbing the old oak tree in the backyard was frozen in time, a smiling photograph on a missing poster slowly succumbing to the elements. The world moved on. The Vances remained trapped in that cold corridor, forever waiting for a door that would never open. 5 years passed, then 10. The shadow of October 3rd, 1998, grew longer, darker, an inescapable part of who they were. Hope had shriveled to a bitter, hard seed buried deep within, almost unrecognizable. Almost, the years stretched like taffy pulled thin and brittle. Hartford changed around the Vance house. New shops sprouted, old buildings fell, children who once played hopscotch with Eleanor grew up, moved away. The Vance residence remained frozen, a monument to absence. Sarah moved through the rooms like a sleepwalker. She kept Eleanor's room pristine, vacuuming dust from untouched carpet, straightening the stuffed rabbit on the pillow. The silence within those walls was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. David retreated further into a shell of grim endurance. His engineering office became a refuge, then a prison. He stopped bringing home blueprints of the bank vault. Every line, every measurement was a fresh incision into a wound that never closed. They spoke in monosyllables, conversations orbiting the mundane, bills, groceries, the weather, a fragile raft on an ocean of unspeakable grief. The shared horror that once bound them now pushed them apart, a continent of sorrow between them in their own bed. 15 years. October 3rd, 2013. A date that arrived like clockwork, a lead weight dropped into their stomachs each year. David came home late, the smell of stale coffee and exhaustion clinging to him. Sarah sat in the living room's perpetual twilight, the only light coming from the flickering screen of the television, sound muted. Her gaze was fixed, unseeing, on a nature documentary showing vibrant fish in a coral reef, a world impossibly distant from their gray reality. Sarah, David's voice was rough and used. He placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the bone beneath the thin cardigan. She didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge him. Her eyes drifted past the TV, landing on the old, upright piano pushed against the far wall. Eleanor Vance piano. Sarah hadn't touched it since the day before the disappearance. Dust coated its dark wood like a shroud. A single framed photo of Eleanor, beaming after her first recital, sat atop it, the glass smudged. Without a word, Sarah stood. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a gravitational pull, a sudden, desperate need to connect with something tangible, something Eleanor's small hands had loved. She walked to the piano, her movements stiff. David watched, a knot of apprehension tightening in his chest. He saw the tremor in her hand as she reached out, not to open the lid, but to gently, almost reverently, brush the dust from the top of the photo frame. Her finger traced the outline of Eleanor's joyful face behind the glass. Then, her hand moved to the piano itself. She traced the edge of the fallboard, the cover over the keys. Dust puffed into the still air. Her fingers found the small, brass latch. A click echoed too loudly in the quiet room. Slowly, stiffly, she lifted the fallboard. The smell that wafted out was ancient, dust, old wood, the faint, ghostly scent of ivory keys. Sarah stared at the yellowed keys, untouched for 15 years. A choked sound escaped her throat. David stepped closer, his own grief a raw ache. He saw her hand hover, then descend, not to play a note, but to press down on the highest treble key, a tiny, shrill ping breaking the silence. It was a sound Eleanor used to make, mischievously, just to annoy them during practice. Sarah's fingers lingered. Then, driven by a compulsion she couldn't name, she pressed down hard on the key again. And again, the sharp ping repeated, jarring. On the third press, something shifted beneath the key. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement felt more than seen. David saw her freeze. "Sarah, what is it?" She didn't answer. Her fingers, trembling violently now, probed around the base of the stubborn key. She pressed it down fully, holding it. With her other hand, she carefully, delicately, tried to wiggle the key itself. It resisted, then, with a minuscule scrape of wood on wood, it tilted slightly up at the back, near the pin block, revealing a hidden compartment no larger than a matchbox, cunningly integrated into the piano's action mechanism beneath the key. Sarah gasped, snatching her hand back as if burned. David was beside her instantly, peering into the dark, narrow slot. What the hell? He fumbled in his pocket, pulled out his keyring, and used the small penlight attached. The narrow beam cut into the darkness. Inside the compartment, nestled in decades of accumulated felt fluff and wood shavings, lay two things. One was a small, tarnished silver key, utterly unfamiliar, its teeth worn smooth. The other was a tightly rolled cylinder of paper, yellowed with age, secured with a brittle rubber band. David's breath hitched. His engineer's mind screamed impossible. This piano had been in their living room since before Eleanor was born. He'd helped move it in. He'd watched Eleanor practice on it for years. How could anything be hidden here, unseen? Sarah's trembling hand reached in, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the key before carefully extracting the paper cylinder. The rubber band snapped as she unrolled it with infinite care on the dusty piano top. The penlight beam illuminated the paper. It wasn't just any paper. It was drafting vellum, thin and tough. Drawn upon it, in precise, intricate lines of faded black ink, was a blueprint. But it wasn't of the bank vault. David recognized drafting conventions instantly. Elevation markers, section lines, detailed annotations in a cramped, unfamiliar hand. His eyes scanned the complex network of lines and symbols. It depicted a structure, but one that made no sense. It showed intersecting corridors at impossible angles, rooms labeled cryptically, chamber of resonance, the silent axis, and intricate mechanical systems involving counterweights, rotating sections, and ventilation shafts depicted like branching arteries. In the center, dominating the plan, was a large, circular chamber labeled only with a symbol, a stylized, closed eye. And there, tucked into one corner of the blueprint, drawn with surprising care, was a small, unmistakable figure. A child, with hair like spun wheat, standing in a corridor that looked chillingly similar to the access hallway outside Vault B at First National Trust. Sarah's knees buckled. David barely caught her, lowering her gently to the floor as she began to sob, great, racking gasps that tore from her chest. She clutched the blueprint, her fingers smudging the ancient ink over the tiny figure. Did she put this here? Sarah choked out, disbelief warring with a horrifying, burgeoning hope. But when? How? David stared at the blueprint, his mind reeling. The precision was professional, far beyond a child's capability. The date scrawled faintly in one corner, Rev 08-12-98, stopped his heart. August 12, 1998, less than 2 months before Eleanor vanished. A blueprint hidden in her own piano, depicting a labyrinthine structure featuring a child that looked exactly like her, found 15 years after she disappeared from a locked vault. It defied reason. It screamed conspiracy. The tiny silver key lay cold in his palm. What door did it open? What did the symbol of the closed, I mean? And the most terrifying question of all, if Eleanor had hidden this, what had she been afraid of? Or who had put it there, and why leave it for them to find after all this time? The cold corridor of the bank vault dissolved, replaced by the chilling complexity of the lines on the vellum. Their daughter hadn't just vanished. She'd left a map to a place David, with all his engineering knowledge, couldn't begin to comprehend. The years of fading hope ignited into a white-hot flame of terrifying possibility. The shadow hadn't lifted. It had deepened, twisting into the shape of an impossible blueprint found inside a silent piano. The mystery wasn't solved. It had just become infinitely darker, more complex, and horrifyingly real. The hunt wasn't over. It had just changed direction, pointing towards a hidden architecture of secrets, and the tiny, worn key felt like the first step into a labyrinth far more dangerous than any bank vault. The silence of the house was now filled with the deafening roar of unanswered questions, and the chilling certainty that their daughter's disappearance was only the visible edge of something vast, ancient, and deeply, profoundly wrong. Doorways, it seemed, could exist where no doors should be. David's hands, usually so steady for drafting precise lines, trembled as he spread the fragile vellum blueprint across the dining table. The overhead light glared, making the faded ink swim. Sarah sat rigid beside him, her knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the table, her eyes wide and haunted, fixed on the small, drawn figure. The air hummed with a tension thicker than the dust they'd disturbed. This isn't possible," David whispered, his voice raw. He traced a line, representing a corridor intersecting another at a sharp, non-perpendicular angle. "These load-bearing walls, they defy physics. This structure couldn't stand. It's deliberate nonsense? Or," he trailed off, the alternative too monstrous to voice. Sarah's finger jabbed at the tiny figure. "That's her, David. That's Eleanor. Her hair, the way she stood. Her voice cracked. How was she drawn here? In this place? Months before?" The question hung, suffocating. David forced himself to focus on the technical details. The annotations were cryptic, abbreviated. Res. Arum. Mul. 7. Axial dampeners engaged. Sec. Von. Path alpha. Asterisk. None of it meant anything concrete. The central symbol, the stylized closed eye, seemed to watch them from the paper. It felt cold, mocking. The small silver key lay beside the blueprint. David picked it up. It was old, the metal worn smooth with age or handling, the teeth simple, almost primitive. "Not a modern safe key," he muttered. "Maybe a desk? A cabinet? A specific kind of lock." It felt insignificant, yet terrifyingly potent. A key to what? Sleep was impossible. David spent the night hunched over the blueprint under a magnifying lamp, sketching overlays on tracing paper, trying to. Sarah paced. The blueprint clutched to her chest at times, then laid out again as if expecting it to change. The silence of the house was now filled with the frantic scratching of David's pencil and the frantic rhythm of Sarah's footsteps. By dawn, a grim resolve had settled over David. "We need to know what this symbol means," he stated, pointing at the closed eye. "And who drew this? That handwriting, it's precise, adult, not a child's." The implication was clear. Eleanor hadn't drawn it. She'd hidden it. Sarah nodded, a spark of desperate energy in her hollow eyes. "The library. Archive. Old newspapers. Maybe it's an architect's mark? A builder's symbol?" Hartford Public Library's local history section felt cavernous and hushed, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust. Sarah, moving with a brittle determination David hadn't seen in years, attacked the microfilm readers. She scrolled through decades of Hartford Courant issues, her eyes scanning for architectural articles, advertisements for builders, any mention of unusual construction. David buried himself in volumes of historical architecture, symbol dictionaries, records of local firms. Hours bled away, filled only by the whirring of microfilm and the turning of brittle pages. The closed eye symbol stared back at them from the blueprint, a maddening enigma. Frustration mounted. Nothing matched. The symbol seemed unique, alien. David leaned back, rubbing his burning eyes. "Maybe it's not local," he said, defeat heavy in his voice. "Maybe it's something else entirely." Sarah didn't answer. She was frozen, staring at a microfilm screen displaying the Courant from September 20th, 1998. Her finger trembled as it pointed to a small obituary notice tucked away on page B7. Alastair Finch, 1921–1998, renowned local architect, known for his innovative, sometimes controversial, designs including the first National Trust Annex, 1972, passed away unexpectedly at his home on September 18th. Private services were held. Survived by his sister, Beatrice Finch of New Haven. Below the text was a small, grainy photograph of a man with sharp features and intelligent, piercing eyes. And beside his name, almost as an afterthought, was a tiny, printed symbol. The closed eye. David's breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer. Yes, unmistakable. The same stylized lid, the same slight downward curve. "Finch," David breathed. "He designed a bank annex, including the vault corridor." His mind raced. August 12th, 1998, the revision date on the blueprint. Alastair Finch died barely a month later. Unexpectedly. Sarah's voice was a ghost of sound. He knew. He drew this. He knew about that place. She gestured wildly at the blueprint. And he died weeks before Eleanor vanished. A chill deeper than any vault seeped into David's bones. Coincidence was a luxury they couldn't afford. This was connection. Tangible, terrifying connection. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes behind thick glasses, noticed their intense focus. "The Finch collection?" she asked softly, seeing the name on the screen. Such a tragedy, his passing. Brilliant man, but reclusive in his later years. Quite eccentric, obsessed with acoustics and unconventional spaces. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Rumors swirled, of course, about his designs having hidden purposes, especially that bank edition. People said Finch was paid a fortune for it, far beyond the usual scale. David's pulse hammered. "Do you have anything else on him? His personal papers? Designs?" The librarian shook her head regretfully. His sister, Beatrice, handled the estate. She donated his professional papers related to public buildings to the Historical Society, but she was very clear about his private notes and unpublished designs. She claimed they were unstable, nonsensical, so they reflected his declining mental state towards the end. She had them destroyed, said it was what he would have wanted. Destroyed. Asterisk the word was a physical blow. David felt the fragile thread of hope fraying. Beatrice Finch, Sarah repeated, the name etching itself into her mind. New Haven. As they gathered their things, the librarian added, almost as an afterthought, "You know, it was strange. After Finch died, there was a brief police inquiry. Routine, they said, for an unexpected death at home. But I remember the officer who came to collect some loan planning documents mentioning Finch's study. Said it looked like someone had gone through it thoroughly before the sister arrived. Like they were searching for something specific." David and Sarah exchanged a look. The blueprint. The key. Someone else had been looking. Someone who knew Finch had secrets. Secrets worth killing for? The official cause of Finch's death might have been natural, but the timing, the ransacked study, it stank of something darker. Driving back, the atmosphere in the car was electric with dread and renewed purpose. The mystery had a name now, Alastair Finch, and a destination, New Haven and Beatrice Finch. "David," Sarah said suddenly, her voice tight with a new kind of horror. She was staring out the window, not seeing the passing streets. "That symbol, the closed eye. I think I've seen it before. Not recently. Long ago." David glanced at her, apprehension coiling in his gut. "Where?" Sarah turned to him, her face pale as milk. "Eleanor. A few weeks, maybe a month before she vanished. She had a nightmare. A bad one. She woke up screaming about the mean I watching her in the dark. She was so scared, trembling. I calmed her down, held her until she fell asleep. In the morning, she was quiet, withdrawn. When I asked about the dream, she just shook her head. But Sarah's breath hitched. But later that day, I found her drawing on the back of a cereal box. She'd drawn it over and over. Crude, childish, but it was an eye. A closed eye. David felt the world tilt. Eleanor had seen the symbol. Before finding the blueprint. Before Finch died? Had Finch shown it to her? Told her something? Or had she somehow sensed it? The implications were staggering, terrifying. Their 8-year-old daughter hadn't just stumbled upon a secret. She'd been marked by it, haunted by it. And whatever it represented, whatever world Alastair Finch had blueprint in impossible lines, it had reached out and swallowed her whole from the heart of a locked vault. The worn silver key felt like ice in David's pocket. It wasn't just a key to a lock. It felt like a key to a nightmare their daughter had foreseen. New Haven couldn't come soon enough. They had to find Beatrice Finch. They had to know what her brother had built, what he knew, and what terrifying truth lay behind the closed eye that had watched their daughter, even in her dreams. The labyrinth on the paper was no longer just lines. It was a map into the darkness that had taken Eleanor, and they were now stepping onto its threshold, armed only with a fragile piece of vellum and a cold, silver key. The drive to New Haven was a blur of rain-slicked highways and gnawing dread. David gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, the worn silver key a cold, accusing weight in his pocket. Sarah sat rigid beside him, the fragile vellum blueprint carefully encased in a clear plastic sleeve on her lap. The stylized closed, I seemed to watch the passing landscape, a silent sentinel to their mounting terror. Alastair Finch wasn't just an architect. He was the architect of their nightmare. And his sister Beatrice held the only keys to understanding why. Beatrice Finch lived on the outskirts of New Haven, in a once grand Victorian house now shrouded by overgrown rhododendrons and an air of profound neglect. The paint peeled like sunburnt skin, and several upstairs windows were boarded over. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress slowly succumbing to siege. David parked their aging sedan at the curb, the engine ticking loudly in the sudden silence. Rain began to patter softly on the roof. They walked up the cracked flagstone path, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The porch groaned under their weight. Sarah hesitated, then pressed the doorbell. A distant, discordant chime echoed inside, followed by a profound, watchful silence. David knocked, the sound sharp and intrusive. Minutes stretched. Just as David raised his hand to knock again, a bolt slid back with a heavy thunk. The door opened a scant few inches, secured by a thick brass chain. An eye peered out, pale blue, watery, and filled with a deep, weary suspicion. It assessed them, lingering on Sarah's haunted face, on David's grim determination. Yes. The voice was thin, reedy, yet laced with an unexpected core of steel. Miss Finch? Beatrice Finch, David asked, keeping his voice low, respectful. My name is David Vance. This is my wife, Sarah. We need to speak with you. It's about your brother, Alastair. The eye narrowed. A tremor ran through the wrinkled hand, gripping the edge of the door. Alastair? He's been gone 15 years. What could you possibly want? Sarah stepped forward slightly, her voice trembling but clear. Our daughter, Miss Finch. Eleanor. She disappeared. From the bank annex he designed. The vault corridor. She saw the woman flinch, a minute recoil. We found something. Something hidden. Something with his symbol. The closed eye. Please. The silence stretched, broken only by the rain and the frantic hammering of their own hearts. The pale blue eye darted between them, filled with a complex mix of fear, grief, and something else, resignation. Then, slowly, deliberately, the chain rattled and slid free. The door creaked open wider, revealing Beatrice Finch. She was frail, swallowed by a thick, moth-eaten cardigan. Her white hair was thin, wispy, but her posture was unnervingly straight, and her gaze, though wary, held a sharp, penetrating intelligence. She looked like a woman who had spent years listening at keyholes, expecting the worst. Come in, she rasped, stepping back. Quickly. The interior was a shock. It wasn't just neglected. It was meticulously preserved in a state of suspended decay. Dust lay thick on heavy, dark furniture. Doilies yellowed under glass domes. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old paper, lavender sachets gone musty, and something faintly chemical. But amidst the clutter, there were startling pockets of order. Stacks of books precisely aligned. Framed architectural sketches hung perfectly level. And everywhere, subtly woven into embroidered cushions, etched onto dusty picture frames, even subtly patterned into the faded wallpaper border, the closed-eye symbol. Beatrice led them not to a living room, but to a small, cluttered study at the back of the house. Bookshelves groaned under technical manuals, volumes on acoustics, metaphysics, and obscure mathematics. Blueprint tubes leaned in corners. A large, scarred drafting table dominated the space, its surface surprisingly clear except for a single, framed photograph of a younger Alastair Finch, his intelligent eyes staring defiantly out. Sit, Beatrice commanded, pointing to two worn velvet armchairs. She remained standing, her back to a towering bookcase, watching them like a cornered animal assessing threats. You mentioned the eye and the vault. Her voice was flat, devoid of warmth. What did you find? David carefully extracted the plastic-sleeved blueprint from Sarah's bag. He didn't unroll it fully, just enough to show the central symbol and the chillingly familiar corridor sketch. He held it up. Beatrice Finch went utterly still. Her breath hitched audibly. The color drained completely from her already pale face, leaving her looking cadaverous. Her gaze locked onto the small, drawn figure of the child. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, a tremor shook her frame. "Oh, Alistair," she whispered, a sound of profound sorrow and accusation. "What did you do?" "You recognize it," Sarah stated, her voice barely a whisper. Hope and terror warred within her. "You know what this place is." Beatrice tore her eyes away from the blueprint, fixing Sarah with a look of profound pity that was far more terrifying than anger. "Place?" she echoed, a brittle laugh escaping her. "It's not a place, my dear. It's an idea. A terrible, beautiful, dangerous idea my brother became obsessed with. He called it the resonance." David leaned forward. "The blueprint? It depicts a structure. Impossible angle, chambers." Depictions, Beatrice cut him off sharply. Symbolic representations. Alistair wasn't just designing buildings. He was trying to map something else. A layer beneath the physical, influenced by sound frequencies, harmonics. He believed certain structures, built with specific materials at precise angles, could resonate, could create gateways, or amplify perceptions, or, she shuddered, attract attention. Attention, David pressed, cold dread coiling in his stomach. From whom? From what? Beatrice ignored him, her eyes drawn back to the blueprint. He designed the bank annex specifically. The vault corridor, it was a focal point. An anchor. He said it needed to be a still point in the turning world. Secure. Impenetrable. Her voice turned bitter. He took the commission for an obscene amount of money. Money he poured into his private research. Into this. She gestured vaguely around the cluttered study. "And the eye?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "The Watcher," Beatrice whispered, the words seeming to cost her immense effort. That's what Alistair called the symbol. A representation of the awareness he believed resided within the resonance. Or observed it. He said it was neutral, a force. But toward the end, she trailed off, her gaze distant, haunted. Towards the end, he changed. He became terrified, paranoid. He said the Watcher wasn't neutral. He said it noticed him, noticed his intrusions. He started talking about thresholds and sacrifices. She looked directly at Sarah, her eyes filled with a terrible understanding. He said children were the purest conduits, their perceptions less filtered. Sarah recoiled as if struck. A strangled sob escaped her. David reached for her hand, his own cold with fury and horror. He used the bank? Used that corridor? For some experiment. He believed he was exploring. Beatrice snapped, a flicker of defensive anger in her weary eyes. Unlocking secrets. But he knew it was dangerous. That's why he hid his most sensitive work. Why he compartmentalized everything. Her gaze flickered to the blueprint in David's hands. That's only a fragment. A piece of the puzzle. He called it the threshold schema. He hid the rest. Scattered it. For protection. Protection from whom? David demanded, the silver key burning in his pocket. Who searched his study after he died? Beatrice froze. Her eyes widened slightly, the wary intelligence sharpening into fear. You know about that? The librarian mentioned it. Police thought it was routine, but she said it looked ransacked. Beatrice sank slowly into the chair behind the drafting table, looking suddenly ancient and defeated. It wasn't the police who searched it first, she confessed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It was them. Them. Sarah breathed. The ones who watched, Beatrice said, her eyes darting towards the window as if expecting figures in the rain. The ones Alistair feared. They came the night he died. Before I could get here. They took things. Papers. Small models. Things only Alistair would understand. She hugged her cardigan tighter around herself. They left the obvious things. The things that looked like madness. But they took the keys. The keys to understanding the dangerous parts. David's hand closed around the silver key in his pocket. He pulled it out, holding it up. The worn metal glinted dully in the dim light of the study. A key like this? Beatrice's reaction was instantaneous and visceral. She gasped, shrinking back in her chair, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes, fixed on the key, held pure, unadulterated terror. Where did you get that?" she stammered. "It was hidden," Sarah said, her voice strengthening with a mother's ferocity. "With the blueprint. In our daughter's piano. Eleanor hid it, before she vanished." Beatrice stared at the key as if it were a venomous snake. "The archive," she whispered, the word thick with dread. "It's the key to his archive. He built it, a hidden repository, for the core blueprints, the dangerous truths. He said it was the only place safe from them, from the Watcher's gaze." She looked from the key to Sarah, her expression one of horrified realization. "And your child, she found it? She found the key in the schema fragment? Did she see him?" "See who?" David pressed, leaning forward. "Finch." Beatrice shook her head, a frantic, jerky motion. "Not Alistair. The other. The custodian. The one who guards the archive. Alistair said he was bound to it. Bound by the resonance." She looked at Sarah with desperate pity. If she found the key, if she saw the schema, she would have drawn the Watcher's eye. And the custodian, he would have known. He would have come for it. For her. The implication slammed into them with physical force. Eleanor hadn't just vanished. She had been taken. Taken by something guarding a mad architect's hidden archive of impossible blueprints. The locked vault wasn't the mystery. It was the stage. The instrument. He said the archive was elsewhere. Beatrice continued, her voice trembling. Not a physical location you could just walk to. Accessible only through specific points of resonance. Points like she didn't need to finish. Like the vault corridor Alistair Finch had meticulously designed. David's mind raced. The impossible angles on the blueprint, the talk of resonance, wasn't nonsense. It was a different kind of physics. A terrifyingly real one. Where's this archive, Beatrice? How do we find it? Beatrice looked down at her gnarled hands. "I don't know. Truly. Alistair never told me its location. He said knowing was dangerous. That the key alone wasn't enough. You needed the map. The complete threshold schema." She gestured helplessly at the fragment David held. "That's just a piece. A lure, maybe, or a warning. Where are the other pieces?" Sarah demanded, standing up, her voice cracking with urgency. "You said he scattered them." "He did," Beatrice insisted, a flicker of defiance returning. "He hid them in places tied to his work, to points of resonance he'd identified. He told me one was hidden within itself. A paradox. He was mad but cunning." Her eyes scanned the cluttered study, lingering on specific objects, an ornate brass astrolabe, a heavy crystal paperweight shaped like a pyramid, a faded porcelain cat figurine. He left clues. For me. Only I would understand them. But after he died, after they came, I was too afraid. I ignored them. I tried to forget. She looked at the porcelain cat, her expression conflicted. He always hated that cat. Said its shape created a dissonant harmonic. David followed her gaze. The cat was ordinary, kitschy, but Beatrice's reaction wasn't. He stood up, walked slowly toward the shelf where it sat. As he reached for it, Beatrice flinched but didn't stop him. He picked it up. It was heavier than expected. Hollow. He turned it over. Nothing. He examined it. The glazed surface, the painted eyes. One eye seemed slightly different. A tiny, almost imperceptible bump in the glaze. Sarah was beside him, her breath shallow. "David." He pressed the bump. Nothing. He twisted the cat's head gently. It resisted, then gave a quarter turn with a faint click. The base of the figurine loosened. David carefully unscrewed it. Inside the hollow body, protected by yellowed tissue paper, lay another tightly rolled cylinder of drafting vellum. Beatrice made a small, choked sound. He hid it in the dissonance. David unrolled it carefully on the drafting table, next to their existing fragment. Sarah held her breath. It was another section of the threshold schema. Different corridors, different chambers labeled with cryptic names. The chamber of whispers, the axiom of silence. The lines flowed, connecting seamlessly to the edges of their first fragment. But it was still incomplete. A large section near the center, the area dominated by the Watcher's closed eye, remained missing. And there, drawn near one of the new corridors, was another small figure, running, looking back over its shoulder in fear. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. It wasn't Eleanor. It was a different child. A boy, perhaps, drawn with the same chilling precision. Beatrice stared at the running figure, fresh tears welling in her eyes. There were others, she whispered, her voice thick with grief and guilt. Before your daughter. Disappearances no one could explain. Quiet little tragedies. Alistair, towards the end, he knew what his resonance points were doing, what they were attracting, what the custodian took. She looked at Sarah, her face a mask of anguish. He tried to stop it. He built the archive to contain the knowledge, to lock it away. But he was too late. Or not strong enough. David stared at the converging blueprints, the silver key cold in his hand, the terrified figure of the unknown child running through impossible architecture. The Watcher's symbol loomed over the gaping void where the final piece belonged. The archive wasn't just a repository. It was a prison for monstrous knowledge, guarded by something that stole children as conduits or sacrifices. And Eleanor was inside, somewhere, trapped within the resonance of her own nightmare, held by a custodian bound to the mad vision of a dead architect. The key might open a door, but the map was still incomplete, and the territory it charted was a labyrinth of pure, unadulterated terror. The hunt for their daughter had just plunged them into the heart of Alistair Finch's darkest resonance, and the echoes of stolen children screamed from the faded lines on the vellum. The final piece was still out there, hidden in another dissonant harmonic, waiting to reveal the path to the Watcher's gaze and the child running from it in the dark. The final piece wasn't hidden in another trinket. Beatrice led them, her frail form trembling with a mix of terror and grim resolve, to the heart of Alistair's architectural obsession, the basement. It wasn't a cellar. It was a cavernous, reinforced concrete chamber, shockingly cold and unnervingly silent. The air hummed with a subaudible vibration that set David's teeth on edge. In the center stood a structure, not furniture, not sculpture, but a complex geometric form fashioned from interlocking slabs of dark, polished stone and bands of resonant copper. It looked like a fractured altar or a silent engine. The closed-eye symbol was inlaid into the floor before it in tarnished silver. This was his focus, Beatrice whispered, her voice barely audible above the oppressive silence. The primary resonator. He claimed it amplified specific frequencies, opened temporary pathways. She pointed a shaking finger towards the base of the structure. He said the final schema piece was hidden within the resonance itself. A paradox, only perceivable during the peak. David saw it, a narrow slot, almost invisible, seamlessly integrated into the geometric chaos near the floor. It looked exactly the right size for the roll vellum. He approached, the silver key cold and heavy in his hand. The slot wasn't keyed, it was smooth. He glanced at Beatrice, confused. The key isn't for the slot, she breathed, her eyes wide with dread. It's for him. A deeper chill, colder than the basement air, washed over them. The custodian, the guardian bound to the archive. Beatrice pointed towards the darkest corner of the chamber, beyond the reach of the single bare bulb. He's here, always here, watching the archive, waiting. The key, it's an offering, or summons. Alistair said it appeased him, allowed temporary access. Sarah stared into the corner. At first, nothing. Then, her eyes adjusted. Not a shadow, but an absence of light. A shape, tall and impossibly still, like stone draped in darkness. No discernible features, just a profound sense of watchfulness and an ancient, crushing cold that radiated from it. The Watcher's presence, made manifest. Sarah's breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. David's hand trembled violently. He looked from the key to the silent custodian, then to the slot holding the final piece of the map to their daughter. appeasement, sacrifice. He took a step towards the darkness. David, no. Sarah grabbed his arm, her grip like iron. We need the map, Sarah. His voice was raw. He has Eleanor. This thing has her. He looked at the custodian, the embodiment of the nightmare that stole their child. Take it, he yelled into the darkness, his voice echoing strangely, dampened by the chamber. Take the key. Give us the map. Give us our daughter back. He threw the silver key. It arced through the cold air, glinting dully, and landed at the base of the shadowed figure with a soft, metallic clink. Nothing happened for 3 agonizing heartbeats. Then the key simply vanished, absorbed by the darkness. The oppressive cold emanating from the custodian intensified, making their bones ache. A low, subsonic thrum resonated through the chamber, vibrating up through the concrete floor, making their vision blur. The geometric structure in the center seemed to shimmer. The air above the slot in its base warped like heat haze. Slowly, impossibly, a tightly rolled cylinder of vellum materialized within the slot, coalescing out of the distorted air. It pulsed faintly with a cold, blue light that died as soon as it fully formed. Sarah lunged forward, snatching it before the phenomenon could reverse. She unrolled it with desperate speed, adding it to the others on the cold concrete floor. David helped, aligning the edges. The final fragment slid into place. The complete threshold schema lay before them. It was breathtakingly complex, a madman's labyrinth rendered with chilling precision. Corridors twisted through impossible dimensions, intersecting at angles that defied Euclid. Chambers pulsed with cryptic symbols, the archive core, the echo chamber, the gate of unmaking. At the very center, where the Watcher's eye dominated, lay a chamber labeled the Still Point. And drawn within the still point, curled in a fetal position, was a small figure with hair like spun wheat. Eleanor. But the map wasn't static. As they watched, thin, glowing lines, like pathways of faint, blue energy, pulsed across the vellum, converging and diverging, constantly shifting. It was a map in real time, depicting a structure that wasn't fixed, but fluid, alive with the resonance. The archive. Beatrice breathed, awe and terror mingling in her voice. It's not a place you go, it's a state you tune. David traced the glowing path from the still point back through the labyrinth. It flowed, twisted, and finally terminated not at the bank vault, but at a specific point on the resonator structure itself. A small, unmarked copper plate. Here, he rasped. The exit, or the entrance. It's here. Sarah was already moving. She scrambled towards the geometric structure, ignoring the bone-deep cold radiating from the custodian's corner. She placed her hands flat on the cold copper plate David indicated. Eleanor, she screamed, pouring 15 years of anguish, love, and desperate hope into the name. Eleanor, come back. Follow my voice. Come home. Her voice didn't just echo, it amplified. The resonator hummed, the copper bands glowing faintly red. The air crackled. The glowing lines on the blueprint flared brilliantly, converging on the still point. The custodian's form shifted, a ripple in the darkness, a sense of attention, focused intensely on Sarah. Nothing happened. Sarah screamed again, a primal sound of maternal fury and longing that shook dust from the ceiling. Give her back. A high-pitched whine built in the chamber, vibrating the fillings in their teeth. The blueprint's glow became blinding. The figure of Eleanor in the still point moved, uncurled, looked up, then a sound, not from the blueprint, not from the resonator, from behind Sarah. A small, choked gasp. Sarah whirled around. David staggered back, his heart stopping, standing just outside the circle of light, shivering violently, wrapped in tattered remnants of a familiar blue coat, was a young woman. Her hair, long and unkempt, was the color of faded wheat. Her eyes, wide with shock and disorientation, were the stormy gray Sarah remembered. But they held depths no 8-year-old possessed, depths of profound terror, confusion, and a haunting emptiness. Mom! The voice was a dry rasp, and used, impossibly young and impossibly old at the same time. Dad! Sarah didn't think. She crossed the space in 2 strides, collapsing to her knees and wrapping her arms around her daughter with a force born of 15 years of desperate longing. She buried her face in Eleanor's hair, sobbing uncontrollably, feeling the terrifying thinness of her frame, the unnatural coolness of her skin. David was there a second later, his arms encircling both of them, his own tears hot on Sarah's neck. He touched Eleanor's shoulder, her hair, confirming she was flesh and bone, impossibly, miraculously here. Eleanor stood rigid for a moment, then slowly, hesitantly, her arms came up, returning the embrace with a fragile, bewildered strength. She buried her face in Sarah's shoulder and began to shake with silent sobs. Beatrice watched from the shadows, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Her gaze shifted to the custodian's corner. The oppressive cold was receding. The sense of watchful presence was fading. The darkness seemed less dense, more like ordinary shadow. The key was gone. The offering had been accepted. The guardian was withdrawing. David looked over Eleanor's shoulder at the complex resonator, the blueprint whose lines were fading back to simple ink as the resonance subsided. He saw the small copper plate where Sarah had placed her hands. Etched into it now, faint but unmistakable, was the stylized closed eye. But the lid was no longer shut. It was open, just a sliver, revealing nothing but darkness within. Acknowledgement? Release? He didn't know. He didn't care. Eleanor pulled back slightly, her storm-gray eyes searching Sarah's face, then David's, filled with a dawning horror. The eye, she whispered, her voice trembling. It watched all the time. And the man, the quiet man, he was cold. She shuddered violently. I heard you screaming my name through the walls. We're here, sweet pea, Sarah choked out, smoothing her daughter's tangled hair. The childhood endearment falling naturally from lips that hadn't spoken it in 15 years. We're here. You're safe now. You're home. David helped them both stand, supporting Eleanor who swayed, unsteady on legs that hadn't walked the earth for half her life. They turned their backs on the resonator, the blueprint, the fading symbol, and the basement's deep, resonant chill. They walked towards the stairs, towards the mundane world of peeling paint and stale air upstairs, a fragile unit reforged in the crucible of impossible horror. Beatrice followed silently. As they emerged into the cluttered hallway of her decaying house, the ordinary sounds of rain on the roof and distant traffic felt jarringly loud, impossibly precious. Eleanor flinched at the noise, clinging tighter to Sarah. The mystery of the locked vault was solved. The blueprint had led them through madness and resonance to a truth more terrifying than any simple crime. Their daughter was back, rescued not from kidnappers, but from the grip of an ancient awareness and its silent guardian, lured by a madman's key and a mother's unbreakable cry. The cost was etched in the haunted depths of Eleanor's eyes, in the lines of trauma on her young face that didn't belong there, in the 15 stolen years that hung between them like a fragile, damaged bridge. The door of the vault had finally opened, not onto an empty chamber, but onto a terrifying reality hidden within the world's foundations. Eleanor was home, but the shadow of the Watcher, its eye now open just a sliver, lingered in the silence of the rain, a permanent scar on their souls, and a chilling reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. The horror wasn't over. It had simply changed shape, carried now in the fragile form of the daughter who had returned from the still point, forever marked by the resonance and the cold gaze of the eye.